In Lesson 1 of Ben Learn Blockchain Fundamentals, we covered the history of money. Today, we will be talking about the world's largest cryptocurrency by market cap, Bitcoin, in Lesson 2 of Ben Learn Blockchain Fundamentals. So, what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is a digital currency that is transacted on a decentralized ledger across a peer-to-peer network. Some defining characteristics of Bitcoin are that they are immutable, traceable, fungible, scarce, and efficient. So, what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin with a capital B is a blockchain network that keeps track of the holders of a cryptocurrency denominated in Bitcoin, which is a lowercase b. Therefore, when talking about the cryptocurrency, the Bitcoin with a lowercase b is the correct way to say it. Bitcoin transactions are clumped together into blocks and then broadcast to the network. In order for a block to be accepted by Bitcoin network participants, Bitcoin miners must complete a proof of work which covers all the data in the block. This makes it unpredictable which worker computer in the network will be able to generate the next block. We will dive deeper into Bitcoin's consensus mechanism and how Bitcoin miners validate transactions later in this lesson. On average, one Bitcoin block is generated every 10 minutes. Bitcoin's difficult adjustment algorithm ensures that this is the case. What makes Bitcoin unique? Based on blockchain technology, Bitcoin is not issued by a central authority, nor can it be controlled by a central authority or singular party. Furthermore, there are a finite amount of Bitcoin, ensuring scarcity and no inflation. In other words, they can never be more than 21 million Bitcoin. Now we will take a look at a Bitcoin address. A Bitcoin address consists of two main parts, a public key and a private key. The public key is your outward-facing address. It is the address you see, and it is the address you can use to send Bitcoins to someone else, or the address someone else uses to send Bitcoins to you. The private key effectively controls the public key. In other words, the private key is the password to the public key. Therefore, it is imperative that your private key is kept safe, as a bad actor that holds your private key can control your funds on your behalf. On the right is a picture of a Bitcoin blockchain explorer. The arrow on the top left represents the public key, which is also known or commonly referred to as the address. The arrow on the bottom represents the transaction log. Using a Bitcoin block explorer, people can see which transactions went in and went out of your public key. This ensures transparency and accountability. So, who made Bitcoin? The truth is, no one knows. An author known only by the alias of Satoshi Nakamoto published the original Bitcoin white paper, which was titled Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. The paper mentioned was the inception of Bitcoin on October 31st, 2008. Let's talk a little bit more about Nakamoto and the beginnings of Bitcoin. Nakamoto released his software Bitcoin Core in 2009. The first known transaction was the Hal Finney, notorious cyberpunk in 2009. The search for Nakamoto is considered by many to undermine the anti-authoritarian premise of Bitcoin. Here is a quote by Lao Tzu. A leader is best when people barely know he exists. When his work is done, his aim fulfilled, they will say, "We did it ourselves." A Cyberpunk's Manifesto by Eric Hughes. Privacy is necessary for an open society in the electronic age. Privacy is not secrecy. A private matter is something one doesn't want the whole world to know, but a secret matter is something one doesn't want anybody to know. Privacy is the power to selectively reveal oneself to the world. Now we will talk about creating a Bitcoin transaction. Creating a Bitcoin transaction is similar to writing a check. First, express the intent of transferring value. Anyone can create a transaction from anyone to anyone. For example, I can send Bitcoin to my neighbor, or I can send Bitcoin to someone across the world. The transaction is only valid if it is in a pre-approved format, and it needs to be signed by the rightful owner of those Bitcoins. The rightful owner of these Bitcoins are determined by the private key holder. Therefore, it is imperative that your private key does not fall into the hands of bad actors, as they can then control funds on your behalf. A Bitcoin transaction needs to be signed with the private key and well formatted for every node on the network to understand it. The transaction itself does not have confidential info, such as the credentials or your private key. The transaction only contains your signature and the transaction info, which includes how many Bitcoins are being sent and who they're being sent to. A transaction is sent to a node and then verified and validated by that node. When valid, the node can then add it to its block candidate. Now we'll talk about the Bitcoin accounting system. The Bitcoin blockchain has no account balances, only logs the entire sum of transactions for that public key. Bitcoin balances are calculated by adding up all the transactions from your account. To spend Bitcoin, you have to reference one or more UTXOs to cover the amount. On the left, we can see a normal fiat account balance system. The first uh, column shows the name of the person and the balance, and the second column shows the balance they hold in fiat. On the right is the Bitcoin accounting system. The first column, denoted by account, is a collection of the public keys. The second column represents the total UTXOs, which is the sum of the balance of Bitcoin. So what are UTXOs? UTXOs stand for unspent transaction outputs. These unspent transaction outputs are chunks of Bitcoin locked to a specific owner and are unspent, therefore resulting in the name unspent transaction outputs. So how are UTXOs created? The UTXOs are created when someone else outputs Bitcoin to you. It is then considered unspent until you use it as an input to the next transaction. In most transactions, you will end up with 2 or 3 transaction outputs. This includes the actual transaction, the transaction fee paid to the miner, and the change transaction, which is the excess Bitcoin sent back to you. The next slide, we will talk about how transactions really work. So, Bob wants to send 1 Bitcoin to Alice. To send 1 Bitcoin to Alice, he will reference UTXOs 1 and 2, which collectively hold 1.2 Bitcoin. Bob will then use private key signature and Alice's public key. The output of this transaction will be 1 Bitcoin from Bob to Alice, represented by UTXO9, and a 0.2 Bitcoin change transaction back to Bob, represented by UTXO8. Here is an example of a Bitcoin transaction on the Bitcoin Blockchain Explorer. On the left-hand side are the 4 UTXOs, or the 4 inputs to the transaction. The right are the 2 outputs, which is a change transaction and the total amount paid. On the bottom left is the fee paid to the Bitcoin miners. And on the bottom right in green represent the total amount transacted. The blue box just to the left of that represents the total amount of confirmations on the Bitcoin blockchain. Now we will talk about the Bitcoin consensus mechanism. A consensus mechanism is a way for the network to agree on valid transactions. There are 2 popular consensus mechanisms, proof of work and proof of stake. The Bitcoin network uses proof of work. Proof of work requires miners to solve difficult math problems to validate transactions. While these problems are difficult to solve, They are very easy to validate. Once validated, the transaction is broadcasted to the network. In order for the transaction to be validated, the sender must add a Bitcoin fee. The higher the fee, the higher the priority of your transaction. These fees are sent to the miners processing the transaction. In 2017, when the Bitcoin blockchain saw frenzied activity, the Bitcoin fee was astronomical. This fee was so high because many people were competing to get their transaction processed on the blockchain. Conversely, during periods of low activity, a relatively lower fee can process your transaction in a timely manner. Therefore, it is imperative to add a respective fee to the amount of activity on the blockchain in order to get your transaction processed. In order to avoid congestion on the Bitcoin blockchain, several scaling solutions have been proposed. The first scaling solution is Lightning Network. Lightning Network uses an off-chain payment channel to alleviate the main chain. These payment channels help divert some of the transactions that do not need the main chain. The second popular solution is SegWit, also known as Segregated Witness BIP. SegWit effectively halves the data payload of a transaction. Having the payload means you can add more transactions into a single block. Therefore, more transactions can be conducted on the Bitcoin blockchain before congestion becomes an issue. Here is a quote by Adrianus Antonopoulos. Bitcoin will remain, in my opinion, a relentless anomaly that refuses to go away, a black swan that cannot be ignored or extinguished. And that is the end of lesson 2 of Ben Blockchain Fundamentals.